It was a quiet Friday evening in downtown Los Angeles. The streets were busy, but nothing out of the ordinary seemed to be happening, until one cop noticed a man walking calmly toward the intersection. Jeans, leather jacket, sunglasses despite the fading light, he looked completely unassuming. But there was something about his presence that caught the officer's attention. The cop approached, hand instinctively resting on his holster. "Sir, stop right there," he barked. The man froze. He turned slowly, eyes calm, scanning the officer without fear. That calmness only made the cop more tense. "License and registration, now," the officer demanded, pulling his gun out in a sudden move. Shock rippled through the few pedestrians nearby. Whispers began as cameras on phones started rolling. The man, Steven Seagal, didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand slightly, his expression unreadable. "Do you know who you're pointing that at?" someone murmured from the crowd, but the cop ignored them. He was confident, sure of himself, thinking he was in complete control. "Step aside, or I'll have to take action," he warned, his voice shaking slightly under the weight of authority and adrenaline. Steven Seagal didn't respond with anger or panic. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his calm demeanor almost mocking the overreaction. "Officer, I'm just walking here," he said softly. "No need for this." But the cop wasn't listening. The situation had escalated too quickly. His finger hovered on the trigger. 5 minutes later, the crowd would witness a complete reversal, but in that moment, no one could have predicted what was about to happen. The tension was thick, every heartbeat loud. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. People stopped in their tracks, some recording, some frozen in disbelief. The man in front of them wasn't just calm, he radiated a confidence that was impossible to ignore. Everyone could sense that the next 5 minutes would change everything, and it did. Before we move on, take a moment to think. If you were standing there, watching a cop point a gun at an unarmed man, what would you do? Would you intervene? Or stay frozen like everyone else? The evening air in downtown Los Angeles was filled with the usual sounds of traffic and chatter, but there was an undercurrent of tension near the intersection. Pedestrians had stopped walking, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Steven Seagal stood calmly, hand slightly raised, completely composed, as the officer kept his gun trained on him. The small crowd had no idea that the man in front of them was far more dangerous, or more in control, than the cop could ever imagine. Officer Daniels was a veteran, or so he liked to think. He'd faced armed suspects before, but there was something about this man that unsettled him. Maybe it was the calm, unwavering gaze, the way he carried himself without panic, without fear. "Step aside, sir." Daniels barked again, his voice cracking slightly. "I said show me your ID." Steven Seagal's response was measured, slow, almost hypnotic. "Officer, I'm just walking home. I'm not doing anything wrong." There was no anger, no sarcasm, just an unshakable calm that made the cop's heart race faster. The crowd started whispering, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others instinctively raising their phones to record. "Don't move," Daniels shouted, his finger now pressing lightly against the trigger. "I said don't move." At that moment, the tension in the air became palpable. Pedestrians could feel the impending chaos, like a storm about to hit. But what they didn't see was the subtle shift in Seagal's stance, a small, almost imperceptible movement of his feet, his body relaxed but ready. It was the stance of a man who had faced danger thousands of times and never panicked. "Sir, you're going to regret this," a bystander muttered under his breath, barely audible, but the words carried through the crowd. A few more witnesses began whispering among themselves, recognizing the actor from old action movies. "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" one woman asked, her voice shaking. The murmurs spread quickly. The realization hit Officer Daniels like a lightning bolt. The man he had threatened was not just a civilian. But by the time the crowd had identified him, it was already too late. The dynamics of the situation had shifted, even if the officer didn't realize it yet. Seagal's eyes never left the cop. There was no fear. There was no aggression. Only a quiet confidence, a knowledge that he could handle whatever came next. And in that silence, the crowd felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. "Listen. I don't want trouble," Seagal said softly, taking a slow step back, signaling he meant no harm. But Officer Daniels's adrenaline had already taken over. He felt in control, yet the situation was slipping through his fingers. The crowd had grown larger now, people recording everything on their phones. Some shouted warnings. "He's unarmed. Put the gun down." Others were frozen in disbelief. No one had expected the calm, collected man to be facing a drawn gun in the middle of a city street. And in that moment, the first real cracks appeared in Daniel's authority. His hands were shaking slightly. His confidence was faltering. Meanwhile, Seagal remained the picture of serenity, showing the crowd, and the officer, exactly what true calm under pressure looked like. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, a new thought crossed the officer's mind. What if this man was more than he seemed? But before he could act on that thought, the unexpected was about to happen, and within 5 minutes, the cop who thought he was in total control would find himself on the other side of the law entirely. The street felt like it had shrunk around them. Bystanders were holding their breath, phones raised, recording every second. The tension was suffocating. Officer Daniel's hand shook slightly on the grip of his gun, his confidence faltering as the calm man before him didn't even flinch. Steven Seagal didn't raise his voice, didn't make a sudden movement, didn't even break eye contact. And that, more than anything, unnerved the officer. "Sir, I'm giving you one last warning," Daniels barked, trying to assert authority. "Step back or I swear I'll take action." The words came out harsh, but the officer's knuckles were white on the trigger. He was a trained professional, yet the situation had stripped him of the composure he prided himself on. Seagal tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Officer, I am not your enemy," he said slowly. "You're pointing a weapon at someone who has no intention of harming you. That is your choice, not mine." His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. The crowd sensed it, leaning in closer, whispering. Then came the first ripple of doubt. A pedestrian shouted, "Isn't that Steven Seagal?" Others murmured confirmations. Some raised their phones higher, zooming in. The whisper grew louder until it was almost a roar. The officer froze for a brief moment, his mind racing. This wasn't just any man. This was Steven Seagal, martial arts legend, action star, a man whose reputation alone could send chills down the spine of anyone. Daniels shook his head, trying to dismiss it. It can't be him. It's impossible, he thought. He's just some guy who looks like him. But the doubt had crept in, like a shadow over his authority. And when doubt enters the mind of someone holding a gun, the balance shifts, quickly. The crowd grew restless. Phones were recording, voices whispering, some shouting, "Put the gun down!" A woman stepped closer, holding her hands out, pleading, "Please, just calm down. He's not dangerous." Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. He realized that his moment of supposed control had turned into a public spectacle. His ego was cracking under the pressure, and Seagal's calm, unshakable presence made it worse. Steven Seagal moved slowly, deliberately, taking a step back, not retreating but showing no threat. His body language radiated confidence, control, and readiness all at once. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see," he said softly, almost to himself. The words hung in the air, striking deeper than any confrontation could. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger for a fraction of a second, then released. He glanced around, noticing the cameras, the whispers, the disbelief on every face. He realized this was no ordinary situation. Every choice he made now would be witnessed, judged, and recorded, not just by the people on the street, but by the law itself. Seagal's eyes never wavered. He didn't threaten. He didn't provoke. He simply waited. And in that silence, in that quiet confidence, the power dynamic shifted completely. The cop who had thought he held all the control was now trapped by his own actions. Every second that passed made the inevitable reversal closer, until the point where it was no longer a question of who had power. It was about who the law would side with, and who would ultimately be held accountable. The stage was set. Within minutes, the man who had drawn his weapon on an unarmed stranger would face consequences he never expected. And the crowd, wide-eyed, recording every moment, would witness a lesson in humility, control, and the danger of underestimating someone like Steven Seagal. The tension on the street was electric. Pedestrians had frozen, phones raised, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Steven Seagal's calm presence contrasted sharply with Officer Daniels' nervous energy. The cop's breathing was shallow, his knuckles white on the trigger. It was clear to everyone watching that the power balance had shifted, even if Daniels refused to admit it. Seagal took a measured step back, not to retreat, but to show control. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and calm, like a predator assessing its surroundings. "Officer, this doesn't need to escalate," he said softly, his voice carrying over the crowd's whispers. "You can walk away with dignity, or you can make a mistake you'll regret." For a split second, Daniels hesitated. Doubt had crept into his mind. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. "It's Steven Seagal." "Step down, officer. Put the gun away." The sudden realization that this wasn't just any man shook him to his core. His years of training suddenly felt insufficient against the quiet authority radiating from Seagal. The bystanders began whispering excitedly, some pointing, some gasping. One man muttered, "I've seen him in all those action movies. If he wanted trouble, the cop wouldn't stand a chance." Another woman whispered, "He's not moving aggressively. He's calm, but look at the officer, he's panicking." Cameras captured every angle, the tension palpable in every frame. Daniels tried to regain control. "Step away, now," he ordered, his voice louder this time, shaking with adrenaline. But his confidence had already faltered. His authority was no longer absolute. It was questioned, scrutinized, and undermined by both the presence of Seagal and the reactions of the crowd. Seagal didn't respond immediately. Instead, he observed, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed. Every second that passed highlighted the disparity between the calm, composed figure in front of him and the officer's rising panic. People in the crowd began whispering, recording, commenting to each other, all of them sensing that the tide had turned. A soft chuckle escaped from somewhere in the crowd, followed by quiet murmurs of awe. "He's not just an actor. He's like a real-life action hero," one bystander whispered. Another shook her head, muttering, "The officer is about to regret this. I can feel it." Daniel's hands were trembling now. The gun felt heavier than ever. His ego, which had driven him to confront the man in the first place, was crumbling. The crowd's attention, the phone cameras, and Seagal's quiet confidence had all combined to make him lose the sense of control he had so desperately clung to. Then came the moment of realization. His training, his authority, his instincts, none of it mattered if he had acted recklessly. The bystanders were all witnesses. The cameras were recording. And the man he had threatened was no ordinary civilian. Daniels glanced at the subtle, calm movements of Seagal, the serene focus in his eyes, and understood in a heartbeat. The man he had pulled a gun on was completely in control of the situation. Seagal finally spoke again, his tone calm but firm. "You can still choose the right path, or you can continue down the one you've created for yourself." His words, gentle as they were, carried a weight far heavier than any gun or authority badge. The crowd exhaled collectively. The tension hung thick in the air as everyone waited for the next move. Something was about to happen, something none of the witnesses would ever forget. And within minutes, the tables would turn completely, leaving the officer shocked, humiliated, and on the wrong side of the law. The street was silent now, the usual city sounds replaced by a tense anticipation. Pedestrians watched in disbelief as Steven Seagal remained calm, his presence commanding attention without raising a finger. Officer Daniels' hands were still on his gun, but the weight of the situation had finally settled in. He was no longer in control. The murmurs of the crowd had grown louder. "He's not just a man. He's Steven Seagal." At that moment, the distant wail of sirens broke the silence, drawing everyone's eyes down the street. Within seconds, multiple police vehicles arrived, lights flashing, engines rumbling. Two officers jumped out, badges glinting under the city lights. They didn't rush toward Seagal. They approached Daniels. "Officer Daniels?" one of the arriving officers asked, his voice firm. Daniels turned, startled, confused. What's going on?" His mind raced, struggling to reconcile the chaos unfolding. Seagal didn't move. He simply stood, silent and composed, observing the scene with the calm of a man who had already anticipated every possible outcome. The arriving officers didn't look at him. They were focused on Daniels. "You're under investigation for improper use of your firearm and threatening a civilian," one officer said. Daniels froze. The words hit him like a hammer. What? That's not possible. I was in control. I was. Daniel's voice faltered. The crowd's whispers intensified. Phones were recording every word, every expression. The realization spread like wildfire. The officer who had pulled the gun was now the one in danger. One bystander finally stepped forward, unable to contain their disbelief. Wait, the man you threatened? That's Steven Seagal. He's the one who called it in. Others in the crowd confirmed, murmuring, Yeah, that's him. He's been watching calmly the whole time. The atmosphere shifted completely. Seagal finally spoke, his voice quiet but unmistakably firm. Officer Daniels, arrogance and fear are a dangerous combination. Today, you acted without reason, without respect, and without thought of the consequences. He didn't move to intervene physically. His calm presence alone had already tipped the scales. Daniel's face turned pale as he realized the enormity of the situation. He had underestimated a man who had faced danger countless times, a man whose life experience and calm demeanor had rendered the cop's aggressive posturing meaningless. The tables had turned completely. Within minutes, Daniels was being escorted to the waiting police vehicle. His badge and gun were collected, the reality of his actions hitting him fully. The crowd erupted in whispers and murmurs of disbelief. People had come to witness what they thought was a dangerous confrontation, and instead, they had witnessed justice served in the most unexpected way. Seagal, still calm, turned his attention briefly to the crowd. Respect and patience are stronger than arrogance and aggression. True strength is measured by how you handle conflict, not by how you threaten others. His words resonated with everyone present, cementing the moment as one that would be remembered for years. The sirens faded into the distance, Daniels inside the vehicle, his authority stripped, his mistake public for all to see. And for Steven Seagal, the ordeal had been nothing more than a brief test of patience and presence. The calm, collected hero had ensured justice, not through violence, but through strategy, composure, and sheer presence. Bystanders slowly began to disperse, still whispering, recording, and replaying what had just happened. One thing was certain, the story of the officer who pulled a gun on Steven Seagal, only to be the one arrested, would spread, becoming a lesson on humility, caution, and respect. The police vehicle disappeared down the street, sirens fading, leaving a stunned crowd in its wake. The tension that had gripped the area moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by murmurs of amazement. Pedestrians looked at Steven Seagal with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The man who had been confronted with a drawn gun moments earlier now stood victorious, calm, and completely unshaken. Seagal slowly turned to face the remaining onlookers. His posture was relaxed, his expression serene. He did not gloat, he did not brag. Instead, he offered a quiet, yet unmistakable reminder of what had just occurred. True strength, he said softly, is not in pulling a weapon or showing power. It is in patience, control, and understanding the consequences of your actions. His words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some still recording, others whispering to themselves, replaying the events in their minds. Many had witnessed a rare demonstration, a man handling a life-threatening situation not with aggression, but with calm intelligence and measured action. One young man muttered to his friend, "I've never seen anything like that. The way he stayed calm, it's like he controlled the whole world with just his presence." As the last of the bystanders left, a few police officers lingered behind, approaching Seagal cautiously. "Sir, are you okay?" one asked, clearly aware that the earlier tension could have escalated further. Seagal nodded once, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I'm fine." But the officer, he has to understand the consequences of his actions. He was given a choice, and he chose poorly. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels had been taken to the precinct. The reality of his mistake hit him harder with each passing moment. Complaints had already been filed, his colleagues were murmuring, and the footage from dozens of bystanders ensured that the incident would not be ignored. His career, once full of authority and confidence, was now in jeopardy. He realized that arrogance and overconfidence had led him straight into a situation where he was powerless, humiliated, and accountable. Back on the street, Seagal gathered his composure and continued walking, as calm and unassuming as if nothing had happened. He didn't seek recognition or applause. He had made his point, through presence, patience, and unwavering calm. Every person who had witnessed the scene left with a vivid lesson. True authority is earned through respect and wisdom, not fear and intimidation. The incident quickly made its way through social media. Clips of the confrontation circulated widely, sparking debates, admiration, and awe. People commented on the contrast between Daniel's aggression and Seagal's calm control, praising the actor for demonstrating a lesson in humility and self-discipline that few could emulate. Seagal had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a teaching moment, not with violence, but with strategy and composure. By the end of the day, the city buzzed with stories of what had happened. The officer had learned a harsh lesson about arrogance, assumptions, and respect for others, while Steven Seagal's calm heroism had become a symbol of measured power. And for the witnesses, the memory of that evening would linger for a lifetime, a vivid reminder that sometimes, the greatest strength is the strength of restraint. Steven Seagal walked away quietly, leaving behind a scene that was more than a confrontation. It was a lesson for every person who had watched. Calm in the face of danger, composed in the midst of chaos, and unwavering in the presence of threats, that was the true victory. And it was a victory that spoke louder than any gun could ever shout. The city street was quiet now, the echoes of sirens fading into memory, but the lesson of what had just unfolded lingered in every mind that had witnessed it. Steven Seagal had walked away from a confrontation that could have ended violently, yet he emerged unscathed, not because of brute force, but because of something far more powerful: control, patience, and respect. The event would soon be replayed online, shared across social media platforms, and analyzed by millions, but the real story was deeper than the headlines. True power is silent. It doesn't need to be announced with shouting, threats, or displays of authority. Seagal had shown the world that strength isn't measured by the gun you hold or the badge you wear. Strength is measured by composure, awareness, and the ability to act decisively without being ruled by ego or fear. The crowd had seen it firsthand. The cop, who had thought he commanded the situation, was rendered powerless by his own arrogance. The man he had aimed his weapon at, calm and unshaken, had not only survived but had turned the tables entirely. As videos circulated online, commentators dissected the moment. The split second when the cop hesitated, the way Seagal shifted his weight subtly, the calm gaze that froze the officer in place. People were in awe, not of action or violence, but of the quiet authority that Seagal exuded. "It's almost like he didn't even need to move to control the situation," one viewer wrote. Another commented, "This is the kind of lesson you can't learn in a classroom. It's about life, patience, and respect." But the moral went beyond just personal composure. It was a lesson in how we treat others. Officer Daniels had acted aggressively, assuming that authority alone gave him the right to dominate and intimidate. He underestimated the man in front of him, failed to respect him as a person, and allowed his ego to cloud his judgment. Seagal, on the other hand, treated him with dignity, maintaining calm even in the face of hostility. And in doing so, he not only ensured his own safety but also exposed the truth about the officer's actions, all without raising a fist or escalating the situation. The bystanders, now slowly dispersing, carried the lesson with them. Some shared the story on social media immediately, urging viewers to reflect on what had just happened. "Respect isn't about fear," one post read. "Respect is about how you act when no one is forcing you to. And humility, that's real strength." The lesson resonated far beyond that single street corner. It was a reminder to every person watching that our actions, our patience, and our ability to stay composed define our true power. Steven Seagal didn't stay for applause or recognition. He didn't need to. The crowd had witnessed it all, and the lesson had been delivered more effectively than any lecture or confrontation ever could. Strength doesn't shout. Respect doesn't demand attention. True power is earned quietly, consistently, and visibly in how we handle life's most tense moments. As viewers watch the story unfold online, the final call to action is clear. Pause, breathe, and think before you act. Humility is not weakness. Calm is not passivity. And respect for others, no matter who they are or how they appear, is the cornerstone of true strength. If you believe in the power of humility and respect, type respect in the comments. Share where you're watching from, and let the lesson of calm, quiet strength spread further. Remember, the next time you face someone challenging or intimidating, your response defines you. Will you escalate, or will you embody true power like Steven Seagal did that day? Because at the end of the day, the story isn't about a cop or a celebrity. It's about every one of us, and how we choose to face life's challenges. Strength, control, and respect, that is the legacy that remains long after the chaos fades.